All right, welcome back to this explainer. Today we're covering the frantic, incredibly dense final morning of the 2026 LCMS Convention in Phoenix. We are looking specifically at Thursday morning, July 23rd. This was the final session, and it's where extreme fatigue, strictly shortened schedules, and rapid-fire governance all just kind of collided head-on with the eternal hope of the church.
So let's dive right in with our theological anchor from Matins. Honestly, this is a vital grounding point before we get totally lost in the parliamentary weeds. It reminds us that our steadfastness as Christians comes entirely from the risen Christ, absolutely not from convention budgets, policies, or earthly resolutions.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer as we track what became a literal race against the clock. We'll hit 1. The ultimate victory over death. 2. Fatigue, consent, and time. 3. Procedure, cues, and ratification. 4. Mercy, witness, and martyrdom. And finally, 5. Adjournment and eternal hope.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the ultimate victory over death.
We kick things off with Reverend Dr. Alfonso Espinosa's powerful Matins sermon, which really drew a sharp contrast between our human governance and God's eternal promises. He reminded all the delegates that true courage doesn't actually come from human arrangements trying to defeat death, and he used these incredibly concrete examples, like the early Christian martyr Blandina, or a modern woman battling ALS who continues to receive the Word and Sacrament with absolute joy. Their steadfastness relies completely on Christ's victory over death through His Word, baptism, and the Lord's Supper. It was a really profound framing for a morning that was about to be totally dominated by earthly procedural maneuvers.
Which brings us to Section 2. Fatigue, consent, and time.
Moving out to the convention floor, a newly shortened schedule immediately set this frantic final day tone. President Harrison opened the business session with a lot of warmth and a bit of humor, too. He openly acknowledged the visible exhaustion of the delegates after days of heavy deliberation. He even offered some genuine grace to folks who were experiencing very understandable nerves at the microphones, telling them not to be ashamed of an imperfect appearance before briskly moving into the actual business at hand. For the record, the final credentials report confirmed that exactly 944 voting delegates were registered and present for this final sprint to the finish line.
Now, it is fascinating to see how convention efficiency played out here. A delegate attempted to pull Resolution 305A off the consent calendar so it could have its own separate debate. But that motion failed, getting only 9.46% support from the floor. It's crucial to understand this was not a vote on the actual merits of the resolution. It was strictly a vote on whether they wanted to spend their precious, dwindling time considering it separately.
And because that removal failed, both resolutions, 303A on disaster response and 305A on worker wellness, were adopted immediately together as a package deal. Right after this, the Assembly approved Wednesday's minutes and accepted the newly shortened schedule without any objection. This was a massive decision, guys. That shortened schedule meant any remaining unresolved business was going to be severely limited by the clock.
Okay, Section 3, Procedure, Cues, and Ratification.
At 8:42 a.m., delegates got right into a tense debate over a new resolution regarding whether or not to publish future delegate seat assignments. The debate essentially weighed the benefits of direct communication against the very real dangers of vote whipping and putting undue pressure on the delegates.
Following that debate, they held a voice vote, but the outcome sounded pretty uncertain. This naturally led to a call for a division. If you aren't super familiar with parliamentary procedure, a division is simply a formal request that replaces the total uncertainty of a voice vote with an exact, mathematically verifiable electronic count.
And that electronic count proved that the resolution to publish those seat assignments failed, bringing in only 36.60% of delegates voting in favor. So, no publication requirement was adopted.
This brings us to a vital procedural hurdle: ratification. Resolution 10-08 actually required immediate ratification. Basically, the convention needed to cure a prior written notice problem regarding a bylaw amendment, but they had to do it without reopening the underlying policy debate. That's exactly what ratification does. That ratification passed by a voice vote, effectively curing the notice issue and finalizing the language as determined by the Synod President. But I have to say, it wasn't without some drama. There was a lost queue entry, and the chair strictly ruled any substantive debate totally out of order. This actually prompted Delegate Tim Eden to step up and make a formal inquiry, which then led to a very careful, clarifying explanation from the parliamentarian about exactly what ratification does and does not do on the floor.
Moving right along to Section 4, Mercy, Witness, and Martyrdom.
As we reached the very end of the available time, it became a full-blown sprint. The Assembly powered through critical mercy and national witness resolutions in literally a matter of minutes.
You can see how a series of rapid-fire voice votes successfully adopted key policies while maintaining incredibly strict procedural order. For instance, Resolution 304A on counseling and telehealth was adopted, but only after an amendment trying to change the word telehealth to mental health was quickly ruled out of order, simply because it would have been way too sweeping and it fundamentally altered the structure of the resolution. They also rapidly adopted resolutions on addiction, which was followed by a really poignant prayer as well as apologetics, urban congregations, and God's design for the family. All of these passed efficiently by voice vote.
Then, the Assembly tackled the modern-day martyrdom resolution, which ultimately passed with a solid 79.04% support. This came after a very fair debate that presented both sides regarding an amendment to delete a specific paragraph referencing conservative activist Charlie Kirk. That amendment ultimately failed. However, it is really important to clarify that while the paragraph did remain in the text, the resolution itself did not formally declare Charlie Kirk a martyr.
Finally, Section 5, Adjournment and Eternal Hope.
And just like that, the scheduled time for the convention simply evaporated. Their strict adherence to the previously approved shortened schedule meant any remaining business hit a brick wall. This brings us to what's called the Orders of the Day. That's the scheduled agenda time that, once reached, legally forces an absolute end to any unresolved debate or pending business. Because they hit that hard wall, a resolution regarding religious worker visas was unfortunately never considered on its merits. The chair graciously apologized, openly admitting a delegate in the queue had been missed. But a subsequent vote to extend the orders of the day failed to reach the required two-thirds majority needed to bypass the schedule. The clock had simply won.
Following the traditional itinerarium and prayers for safe travel, the convention officially adjourned sine die. This is a Latin term that literally means without a day, signifying that the convention is permanently concluded. Any unreached proposals don't just get paused for later, they die completely the second the convention ends.
As we close out this explainer, we remember the absolute exhaustion, the tension, the gratitude, and the real finality of Thursday morning. But we really must remember Dr. Espinosa's opening point. Absolutely no earthly resolution, no matter how perfectly debated, defeats death. Christ risen preserves his church. So I leave you with this. How does the reality of the risen Christ change how you view the ultimate survival and work of his church? Thanks so much for learning with us today.